now, and we'll hopefully see some cloudier skies but not too many showers. Some brightness will also be breaking through, temperatures reaching 12 Celsius here. The remainder of the day will see little changes, however for all it will be cooler than the weekend. And that's how the weather is shaping up for today.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Moroki on your TV, radio and online. Coming up.
Yes, in France, Emmanuel Macron remains president, but Le Pen increases her share of the vote with over 40%. She claims this is a victory in itself.
Yes, protests against the royal tour in the Caribbean over slavery reparations.
That should be interesting, and why the number of arrests have halved in the last decade.
Well, we're here till midday, so don't go away. And as ever, let us know what you think by emailing in gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest headlines.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date today on GB News. Police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder after 4 people were stabbed to death in South London. Officers were called to a home in Bermondsey in the early hours of this morning. 3 women and a man were pronounced dead at the scene. It is believed that the arrested man knew all of the victims. In international news, casualties have been reported in Ukraine, with the head of the country's railway saying 5 stations have come under fire. Well, as Russia's bombardment continues, the US has promised more than £500 million in military aid, including advanced weapons, to help Ukraine. In a show of support, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the Defence Secretary, Lloyd Austin, travelled to Kyiv, the capital. It's the first official US visit to the country since Russia invaded 2 months ago. Blinken says there's evidence the battle for the capital has been won, and the US will decide deliberately and carefully when to reopen its embassy.
Part of our commitment going forward involves a number of things that I was able to share with President Zelensky yesterday, including the return of American diplomats to Ukraine starting next week, including President Biden's intent to nominate a new ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Bridget Brink, currently an ambassador, someone I've served with for a long time, deeply experienced in the region, will be a very strong representative for the United States in Ukraine.
Some of the advanced weapons pledged last week have already arrived in Ukraine. The Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin says it reflects the changing nature of war.
The nature of the fight has evolved because the terrain that they're now focused on is a different type of terrain. So they need long-range fires. You've heard them express a need for tanks. And we are doing everything that we can to get them the types of support, the types of artillery and munitions that will be effective in this stage of the fight.
Boris Johnson has congratulated Emmanuel Macron for securing a second term in office. The French president beat right-wing opponent Marine Le Pen, taking 58% of the vote. Macron's promised to address deep divisions within the country after the far-right claimed its biggest share of the presidential ballot on record. Macron is the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years. Well, later, riot police fired tear gas at protesters demonstrating against the result in both cities of Paris and Lyon. Unhappy with Macron's policies, they now face another 5 years of the president in power. Nearly a quarter of people in the UK struggled to pay their usual bills in the last month, according to official figures. And it's as supermarkets cut prices on popular items to try to help customers cope with the biggest squeeze to their budget since the 1950s. So over 500 essential items, eggs, baked beans, sausages and nappies, will be 13% cheaper on average at Morrison's. Asda is also offering discounts on 100 products in store and is boosting staff wages. The average asking price for a home across Britain has risen by more than £19,000 in just the last 3 months. It's the biggest quarterly jump ever recorded by Rightmove. Properties went on the market for an average of £360,000 in April, with more than half selling at or above the asking price. The Duke of Cambridge is going to lay a wreath at the Cenotaph later to commemorate Anzac Day. At dawn, a service was held in Turkey to remember the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps personnel who were killed during a battle in Gallipoli during World War I. Well, over the campaign, 130,000 lives were lost. Anzac originally commemorated the ill-fated Allied landings, but now honours troops from all conflicts. The Health Secretary is going to appoint a hormone replacement therapy czar amid a shortage of the drugs. Prescriptions for HRT have more than doubled in the last 5 years, but stocks are running low. Sajid Javid says he will use lessons learned during the COVID vaccine rollout to make sure supplies meet the high demand. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Very good morning. It's 10:05 and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's. We're on your TV, radio and online. And coming up...
Well, are we going soft on crime? The number of arrests made in Britain has halved in the last decade. This morning, we want to know what's your experience been when you reported a crime.
Yes, also on the programme...
I'm Cameron Walker and I'll be at the Cenotaph later, where Prince William is expected to lay a wreath in honour of Anzac Day.
Yes, and sticking with the Royals and Edward and Sophie's Caribbean tour, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, of course, continues to be disrupted by slavery protests. They've already had to cut short their trip, part of their trip. We asked whether their anger is misplaced and what exactly the protesters want.
Plus...
I'm Paul Hawkins and we're live in Paris as France wakes up to another 5 years of Emmanuel Macron. Big challenges lie ahead for the French. What does it mean for the UK?
Well, we've got that and much, much more as well over the next 2 hours. And if you want to get involved in any of the discussions, in fact, we encourage you to get involved with the discussions. You can get in touch to our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll read as many as we can, as usual. But first, Patrick's going to give his views on the re-election of French President Emmanuel Macron.
Emmanuel Macron won by default. He is a shadow of the man who proclaimed that he wanted to be France's Jupiter King, posing smugly for his official portrait. The man who really believed that he could unite France and be carried around on the shoulders of his people as he ushered in a new era of French dominance. In his victory speech in front of the Eiffel Tower, he said, "Many of our compatriots voted for me not out of support for my ideas, but to block those of the far right." The fact is, Macron was rejected by 72% of voters in the first round, and then in the second round, 28% of people abstained. Today's newspapers are littered with quotes from French citizens saying they held their nose or fought back tears as they voted for old Emmanuel, only doing so to keep the increasingly popular Marine Le Pen at bay. But I can't help but feel that the tide is turning in France. A YouGov poll before the election showed that 56% of voters aged 18 to 24 supported the supposedly far-right candidate. Le Pen obviously had a racist father, and she is very hardline when it comes to immigration and, indeed, women wearing the headscarf. But economically, she's actually pretty left-wing. She had proposed expanding the welfare state for those deemed eligible and has offered tax breaks and interest-free loans to get on the housing ladder for people under 30. I think if France continues to have social issues caused by mass migration and radical Islam, it's only a matter of time before they elect someone who wants to tackle those issues head-on. If I was Emmanuel Macron, I'm not sure I'd be jumping for joy today. Police shot 2 people dead as Macron was giving his victory speech after a car sped towards officers. There were huge protests and violence in the capital. People can say what they like about Boris Johnson, but if he won a general election tomorrow, we wouldn't see scenes like that in this country, would we? The left-wing media needs to make its mind up as well. If they keep dismissing people as far-right fringe politicians, as they did with Nigel Farage, then they're just exposing how out of touch with the public they really are. When the British public voted for Brexit, a lot of the backlash was because lefty media types and lovies just refused to believe that so many people could back Farage and co of their own free will. No. They must have been rigged by Russia. The people must have been absolutely lied to. Well, actually, 52% of voters just wanted Brexit. And people struggle to get their heads around that. Dismissing Marine Le Pen as a far-right nutter is now pretty impossible. She got around 41% of the vote. If Britain was demonised as a racist little country because it voted for Brexit, then what does it say about France, a nation right at the heart of the EU project, when 41% of people who voted chose the quote-unquote far-right? We'll have to see what Macron's re-election means for Britain, but I'll tell you what it means for the EU. Macron is now essentially the leader of Europe. Germany doesn't have the same stature without Merkel, and it's got itself into a right mess with Russian gas and oil. Italy and Spain aren't at the races. Ursula von der Leyen is a total non-entity, and the Commission is, of course, unelected. If France is the EU's leading country and the leader of France only won by default, I think it only goes to highlight, yet again, that we were right to leave that beleaguered bloc. Yeah, what do you make of the result?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting looking at the commentary, particularly around Marine Le Pen and how people have described her. And as you say, 40%, over 40% of the vote, that's what she eventually got with Macron, I think 58% or something like that. It's interesting how it's reversed in France. You mentioned there younger people were more likely to vote for Le Pen. She was offering things for younger people in a way that perhaps Macron wasn't. Of course, here it's the other way round. But I just think you really can't ignore the rise of the quote-unquote far-right. And there are far-right groups in much of Europe. Let's be honest about that. But I think the rise of the far-right indicates to me that people feel they're not being listened to by many of the liberal elites, particularly in relation to immigration, particularly in relation to radical Islam, things like that. We know France has, of course, been blighted massively by that. So I think it's really interesting, but the biggest mistake would be to ignore all those people who will now feel disaffected, who won't be supporting Macron. And look, I don't think they're just going to hand their support over to him easily.
No, exactly. And look at the difference in tone between Emmanuel Macron. That arrogant little man is no longer as arrogant as he was. There's still got some way to go before he's not arrogant. Anyway, French President Emmanuel Macron has won a second term in office. He won 58% of the vote over rival Marine Le Pen. He'll hold the presidency now until 2027, and he becomes the first president since Jacques Chirac 20 years ago to win a second term in office.
Yeah, so what does Macron's victory mean for France, for us here in the UK, and as well for Europe as a whole and the EU? Well, joining us now to answer these and other big questions we have is Jacques Reland, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. Jacques, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to ask you first to respond to Macron's victory. What's your initial thoughts around that?
Macron's victory for me was a relief, unlike your reaction, because like most of the French who voted actually much more for him than expected. Many people on the day after first round, the polls were indicating 51, 52%, and actually he gained 58%. So, and that's the result, is that he really started his campaign after the first round, went within slapping distance of opponents in Le Pen's heartlands and in Mélenchon's heartlands too, accepted criticism, dialogued, and the debate was decisive, because the debate shows that even though Marine Le Pen has softened her image, she's no longer seen as the monster. And during the first round, the campaign, all you could see was Marine Le Pen very cuddly, taking selfies with people, a woman next door who will look after your cats when you're away for the weekend, a very nice person. So, and it's true. 50% of the French think she understands people like them, while in the case of Macron, only 25% think he understands people like us. But the big issue there, when the chips are down, as they were when France has to face a big choice, equivalent to that of Brexit in some respects, then the French know which side their bread is buttered. And
is it not a bit depressing? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Is it not a bit depressing for the French? Though? Is it not a bit depressing for the French though that realistically they were asked to choose between those two candidates? Do you not think Emmanuel Macron won by default? He was seen as the lesser of two evils.
Partly. Many people don't like him. Macron is not loved, is not liked. He has the syndrome of the best people in the class. People respect him, admire his competence, because technically, he masters his brief. He's the right opposite of Boris Johnson. He knows the briefs inside out. And that's what it showed during the debate. Because during the campaign, Marine Le Pen managed to sweep under the carpet all the kind of difficult points of her program, especially on the economy. Her program was incoherent, and he was able to demonstrate that. The other issue, which was very strong and very important for the French, is the international and European status of France. And it was quite clear that in the hands of Marine Le Pen, France would have to leave Europe. It would be, she says she doesn't want to leave Europe, but she said that she would want to reduce France's budget contribution. She said that she would not respect judgments.
Can I just ask you this on that point? Sorry to interrupt, but on that point, clearly Marine Le Pen did appeal to many people. Over 40% of voters in that final round. What does that say about sentiments around things like immigration? Because immigration was the big sort of, I would say, elephant in the room, but I think it's quite obvious to many people who are voting for Le Pen that they care about things like immigration, multiculturalism, perhaps they think is not going how it should be in France. What does that say about those people then who are voting for Marine Le Pen?
But that was the issue. Immigration and law and order, on which Marine Le Pen is very strong, was the issue at the beginning of the campaign. It was highlighted by Éric Zemmour. And once Éric Zemmour, the big change came after the start of the Ukraine war, where the impact, the main issue there was not so much about the Ukraine war. Initially, it gave a boost to Emmanuel Macron, but for most people, the concern was about the consequences of the Ukraine war on their purchasing power, on their standard of living. And that became the main topic. And during the campaign, Marine Le Pen focused on that. Immigration was hardly raised. It was the elephant in the room, as you said, but it was not raised much. And even in the debate, it was only the issues relating to immigration and law and order were concealed by the fact that she chose to promote a ban on headscarf in the street. And that was, for most French, actually some people are in favor of that, but most of the French think that is ridiculous. Okay. Yes, banning headscarves in schools, right, but not in public transport, in the street and so on. That would be discriminatory.
Okay, well, look, being British, I think that we are here in Britain, the centre of the universe. So I'm going to make this all about Britain now, okay? So what does Macron's victory mean for Britain?
But it's not good news for Boris Johnson, that's for sure. Boris Johnson, I'm sure, would have liked Marine Le Pen to win because it would have led to a loss of strength on the part of the European Union, the key motor of integration. And let's see that Macron has become, as you said in your introduction, the main leader, the main force in Europe, and he's actually managed to shift Europe in a different direction. It's more, before Europe was very German, now it is more balanced and maybe a bit more French than German, as we could see with the reflation program to boost the economy at a time of a crisis where he ignored the orthodoxy of as far as Britain is concerned, I think we want to have he will want to have good relations with Boris Johnson on what issues. You know, the thing is that Britain, now that it's outside the EU, seems to have lost a lot of its international might. The main point of the reason the global Britain mattered in international matters when it was in the EU. Now that it's outside the EU, it's seen more as a kind of American Britain, not a global Britain.
Well, I don't know. I think if you speak to the people of Ukraine, Jack, they might disagree with you there, or potentially the trade deals that we're about to sign with India and this, that and the other. I think the people of Ukraine would be much more grateful to the people of Britain than the likes of Germany sending 5,000 helmets, or, to be honest with you, whatever it is France has done. But, Jacques, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure to have you on. Jacques Relland, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. I actually could thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. They've actually renamed a street. I can't remember exactly where. Boris Johnson, in Ukraine.
Oh, in Ukraine. Good. I thought you meant like in France they've done something like Ukraine Highway. Well, I'm sure the people of Mariupol will be so ecstatic that that's what they've done. Yeah, I thought they'd done like solidarity with Ukraine by doing absolutely naff all. Anyway, you go now.
Yes, well, the UK was the world's fourth largest military spender last year, spending around £45 billion on defence. We have a special report for you after this break and the weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine Monday by and large. There are a few showers around, but most places will stay dry. Not particularly warm, a cool feel. That's because high pressure is in control, but it's sitting way up to the north, and that's allowing the winds to come around the high pressure and down from the north, bringing fresh air. But the winds are not particularly strong, and they're just drifting in. A few shower clouds across parts of northern England, southern Scotland. The ones in southern Scotland are fading, but I think we'll see a few more showers during the day breaking out across northern England and eastern England, even the odd heavy one across the southeast. But for many places, it will stay dry. We'll hang on to some good spells of sunshine for Wales, southwest England. 16, 17 possible here. That shouldn't feel too bad in the sunshine, but further east, temperatures struggling to get much above 11 or 12 and feeling pretty chilly. A few scattered showers through the evening, but they generally fade away, and for most it's a dry night, and we'll see some long clear spells. It will cloud over once more across northeastern parts of Scotland. One or two showers maybe here, but generally dry, fine, clear and quite fresh. Temperatures, certainly in rural areas, dropping down to freezing. So a chilly start to Tuesday, but for many it'll be a fine, bright, sunny start. Lots of cloud for eastern Scotland, spreading into southern and central Scotland across northern England through the day. Some cloud developing further south and west, but again for Wales, much of southern England, dry and bright with decent spells of sunshine. Feeling chilly with that thicker cloud in the east. Again, one or two showers over eastern England. But again, in the sunny spells across the southwest, temperatures in the mid-teens with light winds. Doesn't feel too bad. Again, through Tuesday evening, we'll keep largely dry conditions, and as skies clear, it will turn quite cold. A fresh start to Wednesday. The high pressure sitting to the north starts to drift back further south and actually sits right across the UK for the second half of the week, bringing further dry and mainly fine conditions with chilly nights.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, morning everyone. Pretty sure I might be now off Jacques' Christmas card list, but there we go. It's 10:24. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now, the UK was the world's fourth largest military spender last year, with a defence budget of around £45 billion. That's according to a new report.
Well, it comes in a year that saw increased volatility and instability across the globe, push worldwide military spending to more than $2 trillion for the first time. Our security editor, Mark White, has a breakdown of the figures.
As many countries readjust to an increasingly uncertain and volatile global landscape, world military spending has reached an all-time high, passing $2.1 trillion for the first time, the seventh consecutive year that military spending has increased. Once again, the United States is by far the world's biggest military spender, with a budget of $801 billion last year, down slightly on the previous year. But overall, the US military spending on research and development has risen by 24% over the past decade, indicating an increasing determination to focus on next-generation technologies. Washington sees Beijing as the fastest growing military threat. Understandably, China is the second largest military spender, with a budget now topping $293 billion, up another 4.7%. It is China's 27th consecutive year of military growth, and it's had other Indo-Pacific countries like Japan and Australia scrambling to increase their military budgets. Just behind India, the United Kingdom is the world's fourth largest military spender, with a budget last year of around £45 billion. With the standing army decreasing to a figure near 70,000 and concerns over a lack of big-ticket items like ships, tanks and aircraft, there is still some way to go before the UK Ministry of Defence is seen as getting value for money on its procurement of weapons systems.
The UK has always been a top global spender. Might not be at the same level as China or the US, but it's always been, top 5, top 10 most recently. And I mean, again, it has a vast and very well-equipped military that it needs to maintain. The country itself is also investing a vast amount of financial resources into, Air Force and the Royal Navy as a way of kind of building up its military.
Russia has again made it into the top 5 military spenders, with a budget last year of $65 billion. Unsurprisingly, expenditure increased by almost 3%, boosted by additional oil and gas sales as Moscow built up its forces along the Ukrainian border. And with increasing instability across the globe, military analysts predict this year's defence spending will again hit record levels.
That was Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, and joining us now is Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris, good morning. I'm not sure if you heard the whole report just there from our Home and Security Editor. Before we get into the latest developments, of course, on the war in Ukraine, I just wanted to hear your reaction about military spending.
I don't think it's a surprise that military expenditure has gone up. We're in a very unstable world. It's been looking to be that way for some time, and I think what has catalyzed everything now is Russia's aggression against Ukraine and obviously the implicit threat to all free countries in Western Europe.
OK, all right. Well, I mean, I suppose, do we need to spend more? We are giving some of it away to Ukraine, aren't we? How will that impact our military might?
Well, I think the integrated review introduced a very good synthesis between what the UK thought the future context was going to be and what its security interests were likely to be. And in many ways, I think calls to adjust the integrated review in the light of what's happened in Ukraine are slightly missing the point. Ukraine, I think, is probably one of the last of the 20th century wars rather than the first of the 21st century wars. And the integrated review gives the UK a pretty positive and coherent strategy for the future. And we should be careful about taking little bits out of it and taking lessons from Ukraine and saying, well, hey, we need a bigger army. Right now, you know, nobody really knows what we want a bigger army for. They just say they want a bigger one. So my view is integrated review did a good job. Right now, the UK armed forces are reconfiguring both to face the challenges of the 21st century and to get that value for money, which in the past has eluded them. The new Chief of Defence Staff, Admiral Radakin, has been very sure about this, and he's setting about this with some considerable vigour.
And what do you think is Putin's long-term strategy? Because it does seem to have changed, perhaps unsurprisingly. He seems to have lost interest in all diplomatic efforts. He's reported to have actually said the peace talks are at a dead end, and now seems to have his eyes set on, you know, the south of the entirety of the south of Ukraine and moving westwards rather than just the Donbass. I mean, what do you think this man's long-term strategy really is?
Well, I've been saying for the best part of 3 years that Putin's strategy, and I've been on Twitter, I've been on GBNews saying his strategy is to recreate new Russia under Catherine the Great. And that basically means he wants the bottom third of Ukraine, all the way from the Donbass through to Odessa. And 2.5 weeks ago, he gave a speech in front of a statue of Catherine the Great saying, these are my war aims in Ukraine. So the war has been all about the south. He's with his forces, he's tried to fix Ukrainian forces in the north and northeast, and he's been driving across the south and up from Crimea in support of that agenda. So I'm not at all surprised what he's saying. What I am surprised about is that anybody believes anything he says, because he and his vile regime have been consistently lying throughout this. You need to actually interpret his actions, not his words.
OK, now I'm reading reports as well that apparently, anyway, 2 Russian oil depots, I suppose you could call them, that have been supplying troops in the Donbass area, were hit by Ukrainian missiles. I get emails in every single day asking me the same question. I'd like to put it to you. Why doesn't Ukraine start bombing Russia? Can it bomb Russia? Can it bomb far into Russia? Some people keep asking me that question. I just want to know your expert opinion on that, really.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine has to be careful about what it does to Mother Russia, because if the Russians are going to turn against this war, they won't be encouraged to do so by evidence of widespread attacks by Ukraine on Russia. The other issue is that even if Ukraine attacks Russia, the Russian propaganda machine will say this is NATO doing it. And what we're trying to do is prevent the Russian people thinking they're going to be attacked by NATO, because that's what the regime is telling them. Every time one of these attacks occurs, we've also got to be careful it's not a false flag. The Russians doing it to themselves. They've got, I'm afraid, previous history here. During the war against Chechnya, they actually killed their own people and said it was Chechens doing it. So we've got to be very careful about what happens. And the Ukrainians have been pretty smart up until now. They know that pinpricking the bear is actually good, because obviously it means they're going to have to keep forces back to defend against this along a very long border, and at the same time reminds them the Ukrainians do have the capability. But if you go and do too much, as I said, it'll provoke a lot of retaliation against civilians and the western cities of Ukraine. And anyway, the Russians will be told it's NATO doing it, and it will justify even more aggression, I would think.
Good stuff. All right, thank you very much. Rear Admiral Chris Parry there giving his expert advice and insight into what's going on in Ukraine. Right, OK, well, look, when we come back, OK, we're doing something a bit new and a bit different. We wanted to get viewers, so you, or listeners, of course, involved with our show even more than just reading out your emails. So 2 lucky viewers get to ask their questions directly now to people, but also we've got a chap in the studio as well, which we're really excited for, so don't go away. But before that, here's a look at this morning's news.
Good morning, it's 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder after 4 people were stabbed to death in South London. Officers were called to a home in Bermondsey in the early hours of this morning. 3 women and a man were pronounced dead at the scene. It's believed the arrested man knew all of the victims. In some international news, casualties have been reported in Ukraine, with the head of the country's railway saying 5 stations have come under fire. As Russia's bombardment continues, the US has promised more than £500 million in military aid, including advanced weapons, to help Ukraine. In a show of support, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin travelled to the capital, Kyiv, for the first official US visit to the country since Russia invaded 2 months ago. Boris Johnson has congratulated Emmanuel Macron after the French president beat right-wing opponent Marine Le Pen to win a second term in office. Well, Macron secured 58% of the vote, and he's the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years. Later, riot police fired tear gas at protesters demonstrating against the result in both Paris and Lyon. Unhappy with his policies, the protesters now face another 5 years of Macron in power. The Duke of Cambridge will lay a wreath at the Cenotaph this morning to commemorate Anzac Day. At dawn, a service was held in Turkey to remember the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps personnel who were killed during a battle in Gallipoli during World War I. 130,000 lives were lost. Anzac originally commemorated the ill-fated Allied landings, but now honours troops from all conflicts. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Patrick and Mercy will be back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's just gone 10:37 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's on GB News, live on your TV, online and radio.
Right, OK, so now, here on To The Point, we've always made it clear that we want to cover the issues that you, our viewers, our listeners, want to cover. And on Wednesday's shows, of course, we're now entirely having them curated by you, the viewer. So if you haven't already, please do message in to thepoint@gbnews.uk. Let us know what topics you want covered. But today...
Yes, something very special.
Yes, we're bringing in two viewers who've been in touch personally. I reached out to them yesterday and I wanted them to just express their views on the show. So who have we got first up?
Yeah, we've got Alan Howell, who wants to ask a short question on law and order. Alan, good morning. Good to see you. You're our first ever live viewer, so congratulations. I suppose. I don't think there's a cash prize to go along with it, though, sadly.
All right, Alan.
Thank you for joining us. Good morning. Now, fire away to tell us what your question is on law and order.
Or your views, whatever.
Yeah.
Question or views on law and order.
I'm not sure I had a question. It was about stop and search that I'm sort of concerned with, and I'm aware that there's this increasing criticism of our police force in enforcing the law and targeting certain groups, and I just interested as to what the sort of algorithm is, the approach as to how we enforce the law. I mean, I've been in St Albans for about nearly 40 years, and I can see the demographic of this place changing quite a lot. And it seems to be that every other week I look in the local paper and we have some of our minority groups that are with us. I think it stands at about 1.4% are black. We're in sort of leafy St Albans, so it's about 91% white. But it seems that every other week there are these minorities in the paper causing crime, and I'm just interested to know what our approach is at the moment in this politically correct climate.
I suppose the idea there is in relation to a conversation we had last week, wasn't it, about is stop and search racist?
Yeah, disproportionality. Look, thank you, Alan. Look, your view is shared by a lot of people, and I would say, whilst this is why GB News is great, because you get to earn.
He's got a GB News mug. Look at him.
News mug.
He's very on brand.
I would say that. What I will say. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. What I would say is when people express views like Alan's, often they're called, racist, how dare you say. But, this is the thing, I think we do need to accept that disproportionately, especially when you look at young offenders, they are committed by minorities. And on the other side, if you're a young black man, you're 24 times more likely to be a victim of homicide as well. So it works both ways. They're disproportionately the victims and disproportionately the perpetrators. And you only have to look at statistics for that. So it's a legitimate point, I think.
Alan, I think there was making a point that a lot of people up and down the country see happening and have concerns about. And it's nice that someone has got the forum to talk about that, really. And obviously, it does come amid a backdrop as well, as we're going to go on and talk about now, of half of the police arrests are down by half, right? So just come as research from the Labour Party says that the number of arrests in Britain have halved in just over a decade.
Yes, 1.3 million suspected criminals in England and Wales were arrested in 2010, so about 12 years ago. That's according to Home Office data. And by 2021, that had plummeted to just 630,000 arrests. Well, Labour's Yvette Cooper said this: protecting law and order should be any government's first priority. Yet, just as the Prime Minister disregards the law in number 10, his government is failing to back police to enforce it on our streets.
Yes, well, joining us now to talk about this and potentially give us some response as well to Alan's comments is Kevin Hurley, a former Detective Chief Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police. Kevin, thank you very, very much for joining us. Let's start with the arrests, OK? So they've halved in around a decade. Is that right? Well, why is this? So a lot of people might jump on this now and go, you know, police aren't doing everything they can to tackle crime. What's your take?
My take on this is simple as a professional. 11 years ago, Theresa May, David Cameron and the current government embarked on a programme they called police reform, which was invented by 4 young university graduates, Conservative Party political advisors, and they set about changing the way the police operate, the way the police work, the way that the police select and promote.
Oh, it's all right, don't worry, we'll get him back. Kevin Hurley's disappeared into the ether.
Just a second. I've been reading this book. It's by the secret barrister. I'm about half, but I've been listening to the book. I don't know if that counts. But it's been talking about how complicated and messy our entire justice system is. And I'd actually recommend it because I thought, you know, I knew more than the average person about our criminal justice system because I'm a big fan of watching that kind of stuff and reading about that.
Yeah.
But, you know, just to read that book and understand how messed up and ineffective our entire criminal justice is from the very beginning, from making arrests all the way to actually the court. It's fascinating. So I do want to ask Kevin, who we have back, whether that is
back by popular demand, Kevin.
Apologies, Kevin. Just continue your point there.
The government decided they were going to reform the police. And what they've done, in fact, is emasculate it, demoralised it, de-skilled it. As a net result, 2/3 of the police stations in the country have been sold off. The criminal justice system, the point you've just made, has been allowed to go to rack and ruin. It's appalling to think that a rape victim now waits up to 2 years before their case can come to trial. So what we've actually got here is when you deal with a large organisation, an oil tanker like the police, and decide to reform it, you then see what the results are. And because we've had people who don't know what they're doing interfering with professionals, dare I say, like myself and hundreds of chief superintendents, chief officers like me, and saying, we want you to do it this way, don't be surprised. Let me give you an example. I was speaking to a friend of mine literally this morning who runs an organisation called True Honour. What they do is they give presentations to police officers all over the country on how to prevent women and children being victims of honour crime. They went to a police station in southeast London, one of the newer ones, to lecture to 60 people. When they got there, they found that for whatever reason, cuts to infrastructure, none of the projectors, none of the TV screens could work. And when they spoke to the inspector who was organising it, who was what we would call a new direct entrant inspector coming from outside the police, her reaction was, oh, well, it's not my job. Well, if an inspector can't set up some training on protecting women and children properly, this is all part of it. Police reform has caused shattering damage to what the police do up and down the country, never mind stop and search and so on. When you sell off all the police stations and create situations whereby, for example, a police officer decides to actually arrest someone, thank goodness someone does that these days, instead of taking it to their local police station 2 miles down the road, the prisoner, they may have to drive for an hour and a half, 2 hours across London rush hour traffic to a massive custody centre, be stuck there all day, and the streets are denuded. The bottom line is, when government decides to interfere in if you like, a public service and get right down to long-handled screwdrivers, right into the widgets, tell them how they've got to do it, and they know nothing about it. Don't be surprised when we've got what we've got now. Antisocial behaviour's not dealt with, knife crime out of control.
And I just want to quickly, just very finally, deal with something you just alluded to there, stop and search, which is what Alan was asking, Alan from St Albans, one of our viewers.
Yeah.
He was pointing to the fact that when he looks at the statistics and the faces, shall we say, of the people committing crime in his community, it is often ethnic minorities. We know this is borne out in the figures. I think half of young offenders in young offenders institutes are from an ethnic minority background. So, of course, there is that disproportionality. Do you think we do enough to even acknowledge this issue?
No, we avoid it. Everyone makes excuses, allows this culture of victimhood and blaming to come in. What we ought to do is go and ask the black mothers, many of whom I worked with over the years, how they feel about their kids either being killed or ending up getting life imprisonment. And so you understand my expertise on this. I was the head of Operation Blunt 2 in 2008 when we had 29 teenage murders in London. As a result of the strategy we pursued, 4 years later, we were down to 8 teenage murders, effectively saving over 100 lives from being murdered and probably 200 or 300 from getting life imprisonment. The bottom line on it is, as you said earlier, young black males are actually, in fact, on the latest stats I've seen, 30 times more likely to be murdered than anyone else, and they are most likely to be murdered by young black males. We've got to deal with that issue, that there is significant disproportionality amongst some young black males. And this is where, if you like, the subtlety comes in.
Yeah.
In inner cities, that they will carry knives and weapons, because it is not all young black males. I've worked with many great young black males on females in the police and within the army. But there is a problem. Culturally, lots of young teenage black males carry weapons, and that has to be addressed.
All right, Kevin, look, thank you so much, as ever. Great to have you on the show. Get your expertise on there, Kevin Hurley, of course, discussing, well, the lack of arrest, I suppose. It's a decade-long low, and then also, as well, our viewer, Alan, his question about crime, I suppose, violent crime in relation to stop and search as well, with a view, as it were, to, I suppose, ethnic minority communities. So I thought that was fascinating. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's move on to something else now. The 25th of April marks Anzac Day. It marks the anniversary of the start of the First World War, Gallipoli landings, and is a national day of remembrance in Australia and New Zealand. And the Duke of Cambridge will shortly lay a wreath at the cenotaph and attend a service at Westminster Abbey to commemorate the day.
Yeah, well, this comes as Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex have faced small protests during their royal tour to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. And, of course, it's been a bit of a torrid time for our dear Queen. There's the Harry and Meghan stuff going on. Well, now, look, we decided, as you know, that we wanted to start involving the viewers and the listeners more and more in these shows. So I gave Gary a call yesterday. He's been emailing in about all of this. There he is. Gary, thank you very much for joining us. And kind of, as luck would have it, in a way, you were near the studio today, so we thought, why not kickstart it and get you on board?
First of all, did you think somebody was prank calling you when they called you up and said, "This is Patrick Christie"?
I thought it was a bit strange.
He is a bit strange.
I must admit, I was in a pub ordering a pint and watching the wheelbarrow race in Pinner, and my telephone going, and it was you. So.
Well, there you go. Well, there you are. Yes, indeed. I'm not sure what's weirder about that, the wheelbarrow race or me calling you. But anyway, thank you very much for coming in. Now, no, would you describe yourself as a royalist yourself? Do you like the royal family, the Queen, etc.?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I always have. Yes.
And are you a bit frustrated maybe with Harry at the minute?
Yes, I would say that the way he's behaved, really. You look at the Queen; she is probably the most loved, adored, and well-known woman in the world. And what's been happening with Harry, it just gets deeper and deeper, and more of these stories are coming out. And one that cracked it from the other day was, I'm sure the Queen slept well when she knew that her grandson popped in on his way.
Yes.
Had a cup of tea, and just to make sure the right people are looking after her. So she must have slept very well that night.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure with him looking after her. Well, look, as you know, this was always going to be a little bit short and sweet, Gary, but what we decided to do was, hang on, this involves me standing up now to reveal I haven't got any suit trousers on, but no, we decided that we wanted to give you a little memento to go away with. So it's a GBNews mug for you there, and I'm sure you can guess which one the signature is of Mercy's. It's the nice, neat one there. And that one, Iron's, is the one that looks like it's been done by a child. So we just want to say thank you very much for coming into the studio.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for asking.
No, absolutely. Sorry it's not a bit longer, but, we've got to rattle through. So, but thank you very much. Great to have you on board, mate. And thank you very much.
Have a lovely rest of your day.
And thank you very much for emailing in and watching as well and all of this stuff. We really do appreciate you. So thank you very much, Gary. Cheers, mate. All right, well, there we go. We are going to cross over now to Angela Levin, royal expert and biographer. Angela, what do you make of these protests, then, that are going on over there in St Lucia? Is it much ado about nothing?
Well, I think they're far less than what happened unexpectedly with Catherine and William. When they said there was one, all the photographs showed about 5 people holding resentments and posters and flags, but there wasn't a great crowd. I think once these things start, people just join in just for the sake of it, and I think it's a great shame. On the other hand, you see lots of children dressed up in their smartest clothes and people smiling and laughing. And when Sophie had a parrot running round her face, and she was roaring with laughter, and then it landed on her hand, and she looked absolutely marvellous with it, very brave, because it could claw you with their feet in your hands. And I thought, everyone was laughing and cheering her. So I think there's always going to be a mixture of mood when people are travelling. In the Commonwealth at the moment, it seems to be sort of fashionable. But I think, we've still got 54 countries who want to be part of the Commonwealth. They were over here not long ago to show that they cared about the Queen and the Jubilee. And I think there's too much focus is going on small groups of people who will always demonstrate and show a negative side.
And I know there was one particular St. Lucian DJ who was mouthing off on radio, but we can just see there on the screen live images from the cenotaph as the procession gets underway. Later on, we will be going over to Cameron Walker, who's our royal reporter, who'll be there. We can indeed hear a bit. We heard a bit of it there, didn't we? And just talk us through the significance of this, please, Angela, the significance of what we're seeing here at the cenotaph at the Anzac Day commemorations.
Yes, well, they were incredibly helpful to the United Kingdom, both in the First World War and in the Second World War, and they lost a great many fighters. And this is to show sympathy and remembrance, which is very important. You can forget these things and pass on and leave them behind you. And I think step towards the Commonwealth to show that they do care and they do remember. I think good for him. And the Duke of Gloucester went to the dawn celebration because of the time difference. And then Prince William is going to the one, as you said, at the cenotaph. And good for him, actually right, good thing to do. And there I see is the Foreign Secretary there as well. So we're trying to encourage the Commonwealth that we're actually okay and very nice and don't listen to the people who are screaming and shouting about us.
And we can just
see
pictures of Prince William at the moment. Obviously, our radio listeners can't see the images right now, but there is Prince William as well there live in Whitehall at the cenotaph.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. So perfect timing there, Angela, I must say, actually. It was almost like you're a pro at this. And it is actually a very, very significant thing to do. And as you said, it's got global significance. But actually, it's the right thing to do, Angela, isn't it? Because we as a nation here have to appreciate the sacrifices that other countries made so that we could really continue to live.
I think it's very different with the slave trade and all that, and it's also hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But this is simple, it's straightforward, it shows you care, and it looks marvellous, that all the people are there with the right uniform on. And I think anybody who has given their life to help us in any war actually deserves our respect forever and ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we are in the Jubilee year this year, and it is sadly the last one we will be able to celebrate, given with this monarch at least, given the Queen's age. I mean, lots of royal things going on this year, aren't there? What can we look forward to? Just give us a sense of the mood that we can look forward to this year, because there is a lot of sadness associated with, I suppose, the events that will take place this year, even though it will be a year of jubilation in some respects. But what do you expect when we look back in a few decades' time? What will we remember about 2022 when it comes to the royal family?
Well, I think one of the things we'll remember very clearly is what the Queen goes to. My idea is that she will go for Trooping of the Colour because that's one of her most favourite events in the year. And there will be about 500 horses there, so that absolutely will please her. She will go to the Epsom Derby because she absolutely adores horses. And there's going to be a Bentley that takes her right as close as possible to the royal box. She breeds horses, she owns horses, she loves horses, but she's never won a race at the Derby since 1945 when she came, one of her horses came second. So she, if she possibly can, will get to that one. So those are the two main ones I think she will go for. Then the rest is all fun and parties. And one that I'm definitely going to go for is the big breakfast. And that is on the last day, on the Sunday. And it's organised by the Duchess of Cornwall. And it's one of these outside parties where you sit with your neighbours and you wave flags and you eat lots of things.
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Love it.
But the good thing about that, let me just finish. The good thing about that is there a competition at the moment of who makes the best pudding on behalf of the Jubilee. For the coronation, the Queen had coronation chicken, Queen Victoria had Victoria sponge, and they're all fighting to get their own pudding as something that everybody can make. It's got to be simple, but the last decision is from the Queen's chef in chief.
Yeah. We're just going to, sorry to interrupt, we're just going to take a moment to just watch the events taking place on Whitehall, of course, at the Cenotaph. The wreaths are now being laid, so we'll just...
We remember those who died and those who, although they survived, were never the same again because of their experience.
If you are listening to us at the Cenotaph at the moment, and we can see various dignitaries there, including Prince William, of course, Liz Truss as well. Wreath in hand from a lot of people, and the wreaths are about to be laid at the Cenotaph. It's Whitehall in London. The crowds are gathered, lining the streets. It's very sombre. A lot of people in black, but a lot of people as well, of course, wearing that poppy, that most visible symbol of war and conflict, as we pay tribute to the people who helped us throughout war, our Australian brothers and sisters who laid down their lives so valiantly, especially at Gallipoli, in order to defeat arguably the greatest evil that the world has ever seen. And it's incredible, really, I think, that and very poignant that we do actually commemorate these people because, of course, as we always say, lest we forget.
Yes, absolutely. And Angela, who will be in attendance here now? Because obviously it's not open to the general public, this particular spot here, it doesn't look like. So just give us an idea of who is in attendance here. Of course, we know the Duke of Edinburgh is Prince William, but who else can we see here?
Well, they've all got their backs to me at the moment, but I would imagine that there would be chief army people, there would be people from Australia, there will be lots of people who moved to this country from Australia, whose father or grandfather were fighting in the war, and they've come to show their respects. There will be some government ministers apart from the Foreign Secretary, and a lot of military, ex-military people who lived in Australia, who fought for us, and now they perhaps are over here. I'm sure that some have come deliberately as a way of saying thank you, and I hope they stay on for the pandemic, for the Jubilee.
Yes, God, well, yes, absolutely. And it's also important as well to say that in the Anzac Day over here is traditionally about not just the Australian, but also the New Zealand Army Corps as well, who served in the Gallipoli campaign. So apologies there for me not mentioning New Zealand earlier. Obviously, we would never want to ignore their contribution, especially in that Gallipoli campaign as well. We're just seeing now the very first of the wreaths being laid. It does look as though it's about to be done. And Prince William now has been handed the wreath, and he's walking towards the Cenotaph. He'll place it there, possibly take a moment, maybe say a few quiet words to himself, or certainly pay his respects, of course. And that's exactly what he's doing now, and he's just stepping back. So there we are, as he pays his respects on behalf of the royal family, and indeed on behalf of the nation, bowing his head there, and also, of course, just turning to the side, walking away in solemn remembrance.
Yes, indeed. And I believe we can say bye to Angela now. That was Angela Levin. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that. Thank you. Now, keep all your thoughts coming into us on our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, on anything we've been speaking about this morning, or indeed anything else you think we should be speaking about. We'll be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after this break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Moroki on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, we've got another great hour coming up for you. We're here till midday. We're discussing what the French elections mean for Britain. We're discussing Angela Rayner and much, much more as well.
We are indeed. Now, make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be bringing those to you throughout the show, but now it's time for your latest headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 4 minutes past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder after 4 people were stabbed to death in South London. Officers were called to a home in Bermondsey in the early hours of this morning. 3 women and a man were pronounced dead at the scene. It's believed the arrested man knew all of the victims. Casualties have been reported in Ukraine, with the head of the country's railway saying 5 stations have come under fire. As Russia's bombardment of the country continues, the US has now promised more than £500 million in military aid, including advanced weapons to help Ukraine. In a show of support, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the Defence Secretary, Lloyd Austin, travelled to Kyiv for the first official US visit to the country since Russia invaded. Blinken says there's evidence the battle for the capital has been won, and the US will decide deliberately and carefully when to reopen its embassy there.
Part of our commitment going forward involves a number of things that I was able to share with President Zelensky yesterday, including the return of American diplomats to Ukraine starting next week, including President Biden's intent to nominate a new ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Bridget Brink, currently an ambassador, someone I've served with for a long time, deeply experienced in the region, who'll be a very strong representative for the United States in Ukraine.
Some of the advanced weapons that were pledged last week have already arrived in Ukraine. Well, the Defence Secretary, Lloyd Austin, says that reflects the changing nature of the war.
The nature of the fight has evolved because the terrain that they're now focused on is a different type of terrain. So they need long-range fires. You've heard them express a need for tanks. And we are doing everything that we can to get them the types of support, the types of artillery and munitions that will be effective in this stage of the fight.
Boris Johnson has congratulated the French President Emmanuel Macron for securing a second term in office. Macron beat his right-wing opponent Marine Le Pen, taking 58% of the vote. Well, he's promised the French public to address deep divisions within the country after the far right claimed its biggest share of the presidential ballot on record. Macron is the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years. A man's been arrested in connection with the disappearance of a woman in Burnley. Katie Kenyon hasn't been seen since Friday. Lancashire Police says a woman matching her description left a property with a man and travelled in a silver transit van on Friday. A 50-year-old man is being questioned by police. Nearly a quarter of people in the UK struggled to pay their usual bills in the last month, according to the Office for National Statistics. To help ease the cost of living crisis, some supermarkets are cutting prices on popular items. At Morrison's, more than 500 essential items like eggs, baked beans, sausages and nappies will be on average 13% cheaper. Asda is offering discounts on 100 products and also boosting staff wages. The average asking price for a home across Britain has risen by more than £19,000 in the last 3 months. It's the biggest quarterly jump ever recorded by Rightmove. Properties went on the market for an average of £360,000 in April, with more than half selling at or above the asking price. The Health Secretary is going to appoint a hormone replacement therapy czar amid a shortage of the drugs. Prescriptions for HRT, well, they've more than doubled in the last 5 years, but stocks are currently running low. Sajid Javid says he'll use the lessons learned during the COVID vaccine rollout to make sure supplies meet the high demand. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will attend Westminster Abbey following a ceremony at the Cenotaph to commemorate Anzac Day. At dawn, a service was held in Turkey to remember the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps personnel who were killed during a battle in Gallipoli during World War I. 130,000 lives were lost. Anzac originally commemorated the ill-fated Allied landings, but now the day honours troops from all conflicts. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning, everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm Mercy Muroki on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up for you in this final hour. Here's what's coming up.
Yes, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has accused the BBC's coverage of the Rwanda migrant plan of carrying, quote, undercurrents of xenophobia. We'll get into that with the Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at the charity Amnesty International UK.
Yeah, the BBC won't like to be played at their own game on that one, will they? And today is the first day of Alison Bailey's employment tribunal. Now, Ms Bailey is a barrister specialising in criminal defence who's taking Stonewall to court. So we'll be live outside the court with our Friday presenter, Inaya Falarian-Iman, to get the latest on this very important case, really.
Yes, and the Prime Minister has congratulated Emmanuel Macron on his re-election as the President of France. Boris Johnson added that he looks forward to working on the issues that matter most to both countries, not least immigration, I would have thought. Macron saw off right-wing rival Marine Le Pen and vowed in his victory speech to be, quote, president for everyone.
I'm Paul Hawkins and we're live in Paris as France wakes up to another 5 years of Emmanuel Macron. Big challenges lie ahead for the French. And what does it mean for the UK?
Yes, I imagine Boris Johnson's congratulations was through gritted. Well done, Emmanuel. Very, very happy for your victory. Anyway, we have all of that coming up, much, much more across the programme. You can get in touch, as usual, on GB Views at gbnews.uk. But look, first, just before Mercy will give her views on whatever fantastic thing she's going to talk about, I believe it's Angela Rayner, we are crossing live to Southwark to get the latest on the stabbing there that took place the early hours of this morning. So, yeah, Mark White joins us now. Now, the Metropolitan Police say that a man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after 4 people were stabbed to death in Southwark in South London. What can you tell us, Mark?
Well, here there is a very active crime scene at the moment. You can see behind us these metal shutters that have been positioned across Delaford Road here in Bermondsey to screen that crime scene from members of the press, of course, and local neighbours who are out en masse, understandably having received news of the horrific events that unfolded here overnight. It was about 20 to 1 this morning when police were given news or reports that an incident was unfolding here in Delaford Road. When they arrived, they found multiple victims within the property, 3 women, 1 man, all suffering, we understand, from stab wounds. Now, emergency services, we're told, worked on the injured but were unable to save them. They have all died at the scene. A man has also been arrested. He is now in police custody at a South London police station. And what we have now is the slow time efforts, the investigation after the emergency call. Now it's the forensics teams who are in here in Delaford Road en masse again. They have a very significant large crime scene, not a large area, but of course multiple victims that have to be examined, and the scenes around each of those victims. So significant number of forensic officers in behind us, 3 forensic tents set up on the roadway outside this property, and investigators from the Serious Crime Directorate for this area also now in lead of this investigation as they go forward. Nothing to suggest what the cause or motivation for these deaths was, but this man in custody now, he will of course be able hopefully to help police with their investigations. He has been arrested on suspicion of murder.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for bringing us up to date with all of that. I mean, oh gosh, awful case, but thank you very much. We'll be bringing you the latest along with Mark White, of course, throughout the day.
Sadly, it's becoming all too often that we see these kinds of stories really coming out of London. It's quite tragic. But moving on to that big story, that big international story, French President Emmanuel Macron has won a second term in office. He won 58% of the vote over rival Marine Le Pen. He'll hold the presidency until 2027, so for another 5 years, and he becomes the first president since Jacques Chirac 20 years ago to win a second term in office.
Yeah, well, let's go live now to Paris and get more from our very own reporter, Paul Hawkins. Not an easy 5 years ahead for old Emmanuel, is it, Paul?
No, it isn't, Patrick. Front page of one of the papers this morning said, big victory, big challenge, and it is for Emmanuel Macron, because when he came to power 5 years ago, he was the new boy in politics, with a new party, very little political experience, young guy, charismatic. Everyone thought, oh, this is different, not from the 2 traditional parties, let's give him a go. He started with a lot of trust banked. A lot of French people had a lot of trust in him. 5 years on, he's alienated a lot of left-wing support. He's been sitting in the centre, drawing support from the left and the right over the last 5 years. That left-wing support has ebbed away because of his economic policies, such as cutting the tax for wealthy people and that controversial tax on fuel that brought about the Gilets jaunes, I should say, protests. So for the next 5 years, he's going to find it politically difficult to govern, because in a couple of months we've got the French parliamentary elections. The Legislative Assembly, kind of their equivalent of the House of Commons, is going to be up for election. 577 seats at the moment. His party have 263, and it's 289 for an overall majority. So for the past few years, they do deals for to get each law passed, and they don't have to do. It doesn't have to be much to just get them over the line in terms of votes. The way the polls look at the moment, and bearing in mind the result last night, it looks like he's going to lose that majority in Parliament in a couple of months' time. That means the Prime Minister of France, who leads the government, and they are nominated by the President, will probably come from another party, and that means that they're going to want to do things differently in France, and it's going to hold back Macron in terms of what he can do. So he's going to have to be far more concessionary. He's not going to be able to do a lot of the things he wants to do, such as raising the pension age to 65, and it means that it's just, generally speaking, it's going to be harder to get stuff done in France when you're dealing with a Prime Minister who comes from another party. At least that's the projection for a couple of months' time. Marine Le Pen, who lost last night, she says that, you know, the battle's not over, we're going to take it, keep going in the French parliamentary elections. It is more difficult for her in those elections because the way the system works there, it's a little bit like first past the post. It's difficult for minority parties to dominate the French Parliament, but she's still going to go at it hammer and tongs in those elections, and so too is the far left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, kind of Britain's equivalent of Jeremy Corbyn. He's sure to play a decisive part in those elections. Potentially, he could even end up as Prime Minister, even though he didn't make it to the final round of this year's presidential election. So, you know, a difficult 5 years ahead for Emmanuel Macron and for France, a very divided country.
Excellent stuff, Paul. Excellent stuff, Paul. Thank you very, very much. Paul Hawkins there with that iconic scene behind him as well, the Eiffel Tower. I did enjoy watching the celebrations yesterday, actually.
At least it wasn't 52-48, it was 58-42. Otherwise, that cursed number.
Absolutely. Right, well, look, a little bit later than planned. We're moving away from Paris now, thankfully. And Mercy's going to give her views on Angela Rayner.
Now, I never thought I'd say this, but I stand with Angela Rayner. That's right. And why do I say that? Well, in case you missed it, the Mail on Sunday yesterday published a hit piece on the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. It claimed, according to some anonymous Tory sources at least, that the deputy leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition was using a basic instinct tactic to distract the Prime Minister. Some context here, while the 1992 thriller Basic Instinct features an infamous scene where actor Sharon Stone, whilst being interrogated by the police, spreads her legs, revealing the bare anatomy of a woman, and no, not a penis, according to some. So some anonymous, or more fittingly, cowardly Tory source thought it'd be a good idea to tell the Mail on Sunday that Rayner deliberately crosses and uncrosses her legs in the Commons as a ploy to distract Boris Johnson. To basically put him off his stride, essentially, was what they were saying. Now, I don't like to throw around words like misogynist or sexist. In my view, they're overused and they've lost much of their meaning anyway. But I will say this. Whoever has said this is making one implication and one implication only, that Angela Rayner is so inept at her job as a female parliamentarian and so sleazy that she has to resort to using her legs as a political tactic. Has this person considered that women just sometimes wear skirts or dresses and thus their legs happen to be out sometimes, and sometimes they cross their legs, yes, and sometimes they even uncross them and cross them again? I mean, who'd have thought it? It all just reeks, really, of somebody who doesn't know how to feel or behave when a woman happens to be showing a bit of ankle, in which case I would suggest that it's very much them, and them only, who has a bit of a problem. Listen, whether you like it or not, Angela Rayner is currently a force in politics. She is one of the most powerful women in Westminster. Deputy leader of the Labour Party, Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Shadow Minister for the Cabinet Office, and Shadow Secretary of the State for the future of work, or the future of woke, if Labour's agenda is anything to go by. Now, don't get me wrong, she does have many a pitfall. Let's not forget she backed Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party in 2016, a cardinal sin in my books. Let's also not forget that late last year she called senior members of the Tories, and I quote, a bunch of scum, homophobic, racist, misogynist, absolute pile of banana republic, Etonian piece of scum, end quote. Hardly becoming of someone who favours civilised political discourse, and given that a man was actually sent to prison for targeting her with threatening emails, she should really know better than to be carelessly targeting others with crass insults. But she is nevertheless a force in her own right, I do believe that. Raised on a council estate in Stockport, caring for her mentally ill, illiterate and suicidal mother, Rayner left school with no qualifications and with a bun in the oven, having her first child at 16. She was kicked out by her dad for this. Her dad, a man she described in a Times piece last September as a very scary, very shouty man who would tell her off for wetting the bed and who would walk out on the family for days on end. She says her childhood on the council estate was full of deprivation and fear. She had baths once a week. She got bullied at school for having unwashed, messy hair. There were no hugs and kisses and no bedtime stories at night, she recalls in that Times piece. Now, I'm not trying to ambush you with a sob story about the woman. I'm not one to get the tiny violins out. And I dislike much of what Rayner stands for, not least, the socialism bit. But I also hate Desperate tabloid hit pieces dripping in snobbery concocted by old boys with faux machismo hiding behind the cloak of anonymity. This is the kind of thing that puts women, particularly working class women, completely off politics. If I were ever to run as an MP, that is, if I was ever so masochist that I decided to put myself through the sheer hell of being a woman on those benches, then God help me, because I'm sure I, like any other person who happens to have 2 X chromosomes, would be subjected to the same shameless rhetoric. This kind of gutter politics brings our House of Commons, already dripping in scandal and shame, into further disrepute. It's petulant playground politics. So I repeat, for the first and very probably the last time ever, on this instance, I do stand with Angela Rayner.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean...
You'll never hear me say that again.
No, of course. But, I mean, look, I think that was a very misguided piece. I suspect that it was an individual in Parliament, possibly well inebriated in the Commons bar, potentially with a journalist also rather well inebriated, who's made some kind of throwaway comment. I'm not sure how seriously we have to take this. However, I don't think it really should have gone to print, and it is fine. Just very quickly, I must say I was very annoyed yesterday about a lot of the media banging on about misogyny. And I think this article is misogynistic, and what's happened to Rayner is terrible. But, you know, they don't seem to care about misogyny a lot of the times. They can't even tell us what a woman is for most of the time. You know, grooming gangs, for example, when they happen, they don't get the kind of wall-to-wall coverage that a woman in Westminster got when someone was allegedly misogynistic towards her. And, of course, you know, violence against women spiralling cases. I was listening to the radio a lot yesterday, a lot of different stations to ours, and 3 solid unbroken hours of this. That does not happen when Rotherham breaks out.
You are absolutely right. More coverage does need to be given to sorts of violence and abuse we see of many young girls, particularly across this country. But it's time for a break, and after the break, the Home Secretary accuses the BBC's coverage of her Rwanda migrant plan as carrying, quote, undercurrents of xenophobia. So, is there any truth to this? Yes, there is.
Yeah,
we'll be discussing this very shortly.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Well, good morning. It's 11:26 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Well, Home Secretary Priti Patel, this is wonderful, has accused the BBC's coverage of her Rwanda migrant plan of carrying undercurrents of xenophobia. She also attacked critics of her plan in a similar manner, telling The Telegraph, and I'm quoting now, "When you hear the critics start to stereotype, start to generalise, first of all, that's all very offensive. It's deeply offensive and it's based on ignorance and prejudice." Well, is there truth to this or not? Or is it reasonable for critics to point out the expensive challenges facing these people? Right, OK, well, we're going to go now to the wonderful Steve Valdez-Simmons, Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International UK. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, Angela Rayner, I've got Angela Rayner on my brain. Priti Patel, is playing the BBC at their own game here, isn't she? The BBC like to tell people like me that I'm unconsciously biased for this, that and the other. Well, maybe people like the BBC are a bit when it comes to Rwanda. Rwanda's not an absolutely terrible country, is it?
Rwanda does have some serious human rights concerns, and I think it's particularly important to remember that Rwanda has some serious human rights concerns in relation to precisely such a deal as this. It's terribly important for your viewers to understand that Israel struck just such a deal as the Home Secretary has now struck with that country, promising that refugees sent to Rwanda from Israel, which didn't want to take its responsibilities, much like the Home Secretary, would be treated properly and given the asylum that they were entitled to and fair consideration of their circumstances. None of that happened. They were abused, treated thoroughly miserably and threatened with deportation, and ultimately forced back into the hands of smugglers onto dangerous journeys over very long stretches of both land and sea to find the asylum that they were entitled to all along. Pointing that out is not xenophobic. Throwing away out of the country people who have good entitlements and good claims to make, that's a xenophobic thing to do, and that's what the Home Secretary should be reflecting on.
Not long ago, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Grandi, praised Rwanda, actually, for offering life-saving refuge for refugees, offering a safe haven for refugees. This was just last year. So clearly even the UN's own sort of head for refugees doesn't think Rwanda is handling refugees terribly. He actually has praised them before, only a year ago.
Well, UNHCR has expressed concern about the treatment of refugees in Rwanda. On the other hand, you're quite right to point out that Rwanda's specific participation in a particular scheme, which is not for Rwanda to resettle refugees, but rather to temporarily accommodate people while a permanent place of safety in, for example, European countries is found for them as a means of escaping what is surely terrible horrors in detention in Libya, which UNHCR has been desperately trying to secure some safety for a relatively small number of those people.
No,
that's what that relates
but,
to, not a scheme like this,
no, absolutely,
nor indeed the wider treatment of refugees in Rwanda.
OK, well, but this scheme that we've implemented here, really, we're not actually going to, if it works, send that many people to Rwanda, are we? Because it's a point of deterrence, which has been evidenced, I think, by in the last 2 days, apparently anyway. We'll obviously have to see what today holds, but in the last 2 days there were no channel crossings. So in theory, just by virtue of having a deal on paper with Rwanda, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to send a load of people over there, does it?
No, I don't know what will happen on the deal. You're quite right. We don't know how many people will be sent there, or indeed what the longer term effects will be. But what we do know, quite rightly again, as you say, that this plan is all about deterring foreign people, as it happens, people seeking asylum coming to this country. That strikes as xenophobic, particularly when you consider that this country still does not receive a particularly large number of people seeking asylum compared to even a country like Rwanda. So if there's xenophobia going on here, quite frankly, the Home Secretary should look to her plan and look to why she does not welcome the relatively few refugees who seek protection here, rather than seek to expel them.
I'd be absolutely amazed to see how the xenophobia in this country represents itself or manifests itself. And we've seen a huge rise in non-EU migrants into Britain. You only have to go around areas like Birmingham, Rusholme, etc., to see huge numbers of people who are non-white and indeed often first-generation immigrants as well. We're doing things like the Ukrainian scheme, and we are talking about people who make their way to an illegal route. And also, if Britain was a massively xenophobic country, why are they trying to come here, Steve?
I'm sorry, I was talking about the Home Secretary's plan. I wasn't making a great criticism of the country. I mean, we could have another debate about that. But this plan, the Home Secretary defends by calling critics of it xenophobic. The people who make these journeys do not have any means of seeking asylum in this country other than these journeys. And it is not unlawful, contrary to international law, for them to seek asylum here. And since this is the only means they can do so, there is nothing improper about what they do. In fact, they do what they do across the Channel at the moment in the most visible, open way possible to them. So I don't know why the Home Secretary has got it so badly in for these people, but it doesn't strike as a particularly welcoming or friendly or contrary to a xenophobic attitude to those people.
We are running. I could speak to you all day on this, but I must say I don't know whether she's got it in for these people, whether she's looking out for the British taxpayer. You know, something like £5 million a day on migrant hotels, etc., or using up public housing stock. I mean, there is a limit, Steve. But I know you would want to come back on that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to shut you down, but we have to go to the news, I'm afraid, my good man. But Steve, thank you very, very much for getting in touch. Getting in touch, being on the show, I suppose.
My thing is, I mean, they're coming from France. It's not coming from a war.
No war in France, and if there was, the French would have already surrendered.
Would you risk your life to flee France? I mean, your children's lives, I wouldn't, that's for sure.
No.
But, anyway, after the break, we'll be joined by GB News presenter Inaya Falarin Iman. She'll be bringing us the latest on the Barrister suing an LGBTQ+ charity, Stonewall. But before that, a look at this morning's news.
Good morning, it's 11:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder after 4 people were stabbed to death in south-east London. The bodies of 3 women and a man were found in Bermondsey in the early hours of the morning. The street's been cordoned off for forensic testing. It's believed the arrested man knew all of the victims. Casualties have been reported in Ukraine, with the head of the country's railway saying 5 stations have come under fire. As Russia's bombardment of the country continues, the US has promised more than £500 million in military aid, including advanced weapons, to help Ukraine. Well, showing support, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin travelled to the capital Kyiv for the first official US visit to the country since Russia invaded. Boris Johnson has congratulated Emmanuel Macron after the French president beat right-wing opponent Marine Le Pen to win a second term in office. He secured 58% of the vote and is the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are going to attend Westminster Abbey later today to commemorate Anzac Day. In the last hour, Prince William laid a wreath at the cenotaph to remember the Australian-New Zealand Army Corps personnel who were killed during a battle in Gallipoli during World War I. 130,000 lives were lost. Anzac Day originally commemorated the ill-fated Allied landings, but now the day honours troops from all conflicts. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Patrick and Mercy will be back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, morning everyone, it's 11:37. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now a gay female barrister is suing LGBTQ plus charity Stonewall, alleging loss of income and work. Alison Bailey says, quote, Stonewall have signed up many companies, public bodies, voluntary sector organisations and government departments to their manifesto and their value system regarding trans rights. It has done this by trying to silence and vilify women like me who have genuine concerns about how its approach to trans inclusivity conflicts with the protection, safety and dignity of women, children and LGBT people. Definitely something a lawyer wrote, you can tell.
Well, yeah, absolutely. A bit of a mouthful as well, to be fair. But anyway, joining us now is GB News presenter Inaya Folarin Iman, live outside the Central London Employment Tribunal in Holborn. Tell us more, please, about this case being brought by Alison Bailey, Inaya.
Yeah, so this is quite a significant case. Alison Bailey is a barrister specialising in criminal defence law, and in 2019 she co-launched LGB Alliance, which is a charity which specialises in the rights and protections for same-sex attracted people, particularly gay, lesbian and bisexual people. And this charity has come under controversy of late. For example, Mermaids, the transgender charity, is challenging the charitable status given to it by the Charity Commission, and that is an ongoing case. But in this specific instance, Alison Bailey's court, that she is part of the Chambers, Garden Court Chambers, launched an internal investigation against her over alleged complaints of transphobia, particularly in relation to her media profile and some of her tweets. I mean, one of the tweets that caused some controversy was that when LGB Alliance launched, she said that on Twitter that gender extremism has met its match. And what Alison Bailey is alleging is that Stonewall were indirectly and directly involved in this internal investigation. She is accusing Stonewall of breaching the Equality Act in relation to discrimination, indirect discrimination on the basis of sex and gender, but also direct discrimination on the basis of philosophical belief.
Inaya, thank you very much. And obviously this case has drawn a huge amount of public attention, massive amounts of public attention. And yeah, I suppose it could be quite groundbreaking, couldn't it? I mean, it could set a standard, really, in British society for quite a long time to come.
Yes, so Stonewall and Garden Court Chambers vehemently deny the allegations. They originally tried to get the case struck out, but it was upheld. And also as recently as December 2021, they tried to prevent the amendment that Alison Bailey put forward, which was to also include direct discrimination on the basis of philosophical belief. And this is partly adopted by the Maya Forstater case, which was the tax specialist who did not have her contract renewed because of some of the views that she expressed on gender self-identification. And this is one of a series of court cases that we've had over the last couple of years, but also over the next couple of years. We had Maya Forstater, as I mentioned, but only in the last couple of weeks we also had the case of Raquel Rosario Sanchez, who sued Bristol University on the basis that she argued that she was being harassed by transgender activists and the university failed to protect her. She lost that case, but we also had the case of Kira Bell, who tried to argue that those before the age of 16 should not be able to have some of the treatment that is available for people that have gender dysphoria, and that was also partly upheld. And this has been part of the trans debate that has been an intense focus of political contestation over the last couple of years. We also know the J.K. Rowling and the controversy that she has caused, but also Kathleen Stock, who was an academic at the University of Sussex, who resigned following a campaign of harassment and intimidation against her. And also Stonewall's Diversity Champion scheme has come under intense scrutiny over the last couple of years. The BBC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission pulled out of the scheme, alleging that, for example, it may compromise on the impartiality of these organisations, given that Stonewall has been heavily involved in campaigns for gender self-identification and also having the no debate policy on gender issues. So this is part of a wider move, particularly by gender critical feminists, in order to raise this issue in terms of the political agenda, but also to raise awareness of some of the cases that are going on where people are arguing that they are coming under intense pressure for expressing their views that sex is immutable and cannot be changed.
Well, Inaya Flaren Iman, thank you so much for that. We look forward to seeing what the conclusion of all of that is. I think it's interesting, this case, because it's interesting watching which characteristics, which sort of victim points trump which ones, because Alison Bailey, for those who haven't seen her before, she's a black woman. She's obviously LGBTQ, she's gay, and then they're going after her purely because she doesn't agree with trans. And you think, well, hang on a second, you're attacking this person who has all the sort of tick boxes.
It's like top trumps, isn't it? It's a bit like top trumps, or like almost like racial sexual Pokemon, where it's like, you know, who's got the best characteristics.
There's a business idea in there somewhere.
I tell you what, Dragon's Den, here I come. Right, anyway, moving on. Controversial news this morning, as one of the government's most senior climate advisors has been revealed by The Telegraph to be wearing two very different hats.
Yes, and not literally.
Who'd have thought it?
But Lord Debon, chair of the Climate Change Committee, an independent statutory body established under the Climate Change Act 2008, is also chairman of international sustainability consultancy Sancroft International, who has a contract with the Qatari government, one of Britain's biggest gas suppliers.
Yes, there we go. So the Conservative peer, perhaps better known as John Gummer, denies any conflict of interest, saying there can be no conflict of interest in advising people everywhere that sustainability demands they move away from fossil fuels. And all correct procedures were followed. Right, but actually, I don't believe he's the only one. And to whiz us through, frankly, a report that has been a long time coming is Andy Mair, Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, it's fair to say as well, friend of the programme, and I hope soon to become our resident eco-fact checker. Andy, thank you very much. Run us through this, please. What's going on?
OK, so the heart of this problem is the Committee on Climate Change actually independent? And if it's independent, why is its chair a politician associated with the Conservative Party, therefore clearly not independent? And why various members of its board, including Lord Debon, got various financial interests of their own that advantage them when climate regulation increases? So in Lord Debon's case, he's on Sancroft International, but he's also chair of Valpac, which advises companies on how to minimise the impact of various environmental regulations. So if the Committee on Climate Change advises there to be more of those regulations, then presumably there is a direct financial benefit to his company. Now, the way he's got out of this previously, and this telegraphed angle with Qatar Petroleum is new, but he's been called up on this several times before, and the most serious example was in 2019, where the Commissioner of Standards in the House of Lords looked into it and said, nothing to see here, it's perfectly proper for peers of the realm to be engaging in financial interests, all by their own, so you can trust them because they're honourable people. Well, hang on, no.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just a bit of a smell around this.
Yeah, sure. But, you know, when somebody's on a board, you would expect they have experience and expertise, vast amount, in fact, on, you know, whichever topic, subject they're covering on a particular committee. So how do you get around that, given that you do want people with industry expertise and you want people who have those sorts of connections and know the industry very well? Wouldn't you just have to have academics or something if you want to have people who aren't involved in private corporations?
Well, I think that's dead on when you're talking about the boards of private companies, third sector campaign groups, think tanks even. You want people with a wide range of interests and experiences. But if you're talking about an independent regulator, the regulator that's responsible for advising the government on climate change, the issue that's putting up bills at the moment, potentially responsible for trillions of pounds of decisions being taken, no. You can't be independent if you've got financial interests in the companies that can benefit from that. And they've really got to try a lot harder. I mean, you've never heard of the heads of most regulators. So why is it that the Committee on Climate Change has got this very senior former minister, current member of the House of Lords in charge, effectively lobbying on behalf of climate interests?
This is the kind of thing that surely needs an urgent inquiry.
I think that's committees, and they should look at two things. They should look at Lord Deben himself and whether it's still appropriate for an 82-year-old serious regulator in the country.
Yeah.
And they should look at the political role of the Committee on Climate Change. And just to be clear, it was deliberately set up to have this dual regulatory and political purpose because the Labour Party that brought it in considered that it would be important for that group to be advising the government with a big hitter in charge. So that's why he's there, and Lord Adair Turner was there before. But that's not really appropriate. It's a dry as dust issue to advise the government on how well it's doing against its own targets. It's a political issue for third sector campaigns to then tell them how they could do it better. You can't do both together and still call yourself independent.
Just very, very quickly, do you think this kind of stuff has already potentially had an impact on policy?
Undoubtedly. Yeah. I think if we look at the very specific issue of delaying drilling in the North Sea, the government was clearly interfering in decisions in the North Sea prior to the trouble they got into recently. It's moratorium on fracking. These are decisions to restrict domestic industry from investing in oil and gas, and now we see the consequences with countries like Qatar filling in the gap from which Lord Deben is profiting.
Andy, thank you very much. As always, you need to keep coming back and just blowing this whole thing wide open because, as you said, there is a smell around it, certainly, and we definitely need to clear the air, as it were. So, Andy Mayer, thank you very much, COO at the IEA.
Yes, now, an issue lots of people up and down the country have been talking about and indeed care about very deeply. Health Secretary Sajid Javid is preparing to launch an inquiry into gender treatment for under 18s. This follows concerns the current system is failing children, while Sajid Javid believes vulnerable children could be wrongly prescribed gender hormone treatment via the NHS.
Yeah, well, the Tavistock and Portman Trust run gender clinics in London, Leeds and Bristol. They are allegedly giving hormone treatment to around 200 of the 2,500 children they see each year. And referrals have apparently increased 50-fold over the last decade. But I wanted to know how you guys really felt about this. We get loads in the inbox, don't we? Every single time we bring this up, gbviews at gbnews.uk. And I gave a quick call yesterday to the wonderful Russell, who joins us now, Russell Gibbert, who is our final viewer of the day. Russell, cheers. Thank you very much for coming on. Great to catch up with you yesterday. And look, as you know, it's a little bit short and sweet, this, because we get to the guests quite quickly. But your views when we spoke yesterday, you were concerned, I think, weren't you, about the potential for people maybe transitioning too young and then regretting it, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, look, so, puberty is a difficult time. It's you're full of emotions that are new and difficult to cope with, don't understand, and that are driven by seismic changes to your body and hormones. And it feels like the wrong time to be asking people to make life-changing decisions that they can't possibly have any idea how they're going to feel inhabiting a body that they haven't yet moved into. As your body changes as you get older, your emotions change. And I worry deeply that we will end up pushing children into making these changes which they can't back out of later, and which they will subsequently regret. And I think there are cases already around where that's happened. So I guess that's the gist of my concern.
Yeah, Russell, look, thank you very much, my good man. And a pleasure to chat with you and catch up with you. And thank you very much again for tuning in and viewing the show, giving us emails all the time as well. We appreciate it. And we'll have to get you back on, my good man.
And your concerns are very much echoed by many of our viewers and listeners who write in constantly on this issue, expressing those same concerns. So, Russell, thank you very much. Well, we're now joined by women rights activist and founder of Standing for Women, Kelly J. Keane. Welcome to the programme. I'm guessing you heard our viewer/listener there, Russell. And he said, you know, puberty's a confusing time. It's supposed to be. Your body's undergoing this completely monumental change. Your hormones are all over the place. I remember when I was younger, I was a tomboy. I quite wanted to be a boy. And, you know, look at me now. I'm a very girly girl, I would say now. So
I was always, by the way, a strapping young man.
He did ballet.
Yeah.
But what do you say to that? You know, we should absolutely not be interfering with puberty.
Oh, my goodness. It's weird that we even have to discuss it. Of course, you can't ask children in the middle of puberty to make any decision that will impact the rest of their lives. It's difficult enough to talk about what GCSEs they're going to do. And let's face it, that's not permanent. But we wouldn't let them have a tattoo. We wouldn't let them have a piercing. There are laws against that. And yet we can allow them to decide to eradicate their sexual function and fertility. What sort of barbarism is that?
Well, also, I think as well, if we're not allowing them to have sex, you know, rightly so, at the age of, well, anything on 10 to 13 to 14, 15, etc., how can we expect them to be fully... how do you say it, together sexually in their orientation as well? You know, maybe perhaps the argument is you might need to try a couple of things out before you realise exactly where you are on the sexual spectrum, as it were. I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense to have people who are not allowed to engage in sexual activity defining what kind of sexual preferences they want to have for the rest of their entire lives, Kelly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're covering the case of Alison Bailey, and she says much the same. You know, you have no idea of the many... how can I put it, pleasures that your adult body may well offer when you're 13. I'm sure the whole idea of adult relationships are quite grotesque, and so they should be at 13. But, you know, it's just preposterous that it was ever allowed. The inquiry, as far as I'm concerned, should be, how on earth did we ever let this through? What sort of damage have we done? And what payouts are we likely going to make to children whose bodies have been irreversibly damaged?
Yeah, and Kelly, I don't know if you can answer this for me, and it's a question I think I might ask in a civil way, a trans person the next time I speak to a trans person. But what does it mean to say, I feel like a woman? Because what does feeling like a woman mean? I mean, does it mean you feel more comfortable in dresses? Well, you're reducing being a woman to how you look. Does it mean you feel more comfortable? You know, what does it mean? I don't actually understand what saying I feel like I am a woman means if you're not a woman.
Well, quite. I mean, if you ask Harry Enfield, which might be a little bit too old for you two, but it's just about liking fluffy kittens, basically, is how to feel like a woman. I mean, most women just want to feel human and be treated as if we're equal members of society. And so feeling like a woman, it's something that you can't feel unless you are a woman. I mean, Germaine Greer made this point quite some time ago, just before she was cancelled, that you cannot possibly know what you cannot know. And you cannot know what it feels to be a woman unless you are a woman. It's quite simple.
No, indeed. I mean, that seems to be, you know, certainly the way that I would view it. And it's funny as well, isn't it? You know, you've got a sign behind you. One of the signs says, oh, keep men out of women's spaces and this, that and the other. And it's like, you know, my response to that as a man would be, I really don't want to go into women's spaces, you know? But clearly a lot of people do, right? So, but there we go. Kelly, thank you very much. Kelly J. Keane. Friend of the channel, friend of the show, doing a lot of very, very important work, especially in this particular time. Well, that's almost it from us. We've got some views.
Yeah, we've had a lot of views, and I feel like we haven't done many today. But it's just because we've
Paul Hill's
busy.
been in touch. Sorry,
Yeah.
Paul Hill's been in touch, and Paul is our. He emails into GBNews more than any other viewer. We've actually found that out, I think, by tracking it, and he thinks it was funny that you decided to sneak in the fact that I once did ballet.
Well, you did. It's facts.
I did.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
Facts don't care about my feelings.
Yes, Paul did also email in earlier saying
he'd
be too nervous to be sat in front of us to one of our viewers, one of our fans.
Yes. Well, I just want to say, look, basically, I've started ringing round some of you, the viewers and the listeners, when we know that we're doing a particular topic. If you've emailed in about it, now, obviously, I'm not telling you to leave your phone numbers at the bottom of the emails, but the only way I'll be able to call you is if you do. So, gbviews@gbnews.uk. If you feel strongly about an issue, email in. You are allowed to leave your number, and I may well call it. But there we go. That's it from us today. Thank you very much for everyone who's tuning in. Up next is the wonderful Gloria De Piero with the briefing.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine Monday, by and large. There are a few showers around, but most places will stay dry. Not particularly warm, a cool feel. That's because high pressure is in control, but it's sitting way up to the north, and that's allowing the winds to come around the high pressure and down from the north, bringing fresh air. But the winds are not particularly strong, and they're just drifting in. A few shower clouds across parts of northern England, southern Scotland. The ones in southern Scotland are fading, but I think we'll see a few more showers during the day breaking out across northern England and eastern England, even the odd heavy one across the southeast. But for many places, it will stay dry. We'll hang on to some good spells of sunshine for Wales, southwest England. 16, 17 possible here. That shouldn't feel too bad in the sunshine, but further east, temperatures struggling to get much above 11 or 12 and feeling pretty chilly. A few scattered showers through the evening, but they generally fade away, and for most it's a dry night, and we'll see some long, clear spells. It will cloud over once more across northeastern parts of Scotland. One or two showers maybe here, but generally dry, fine, clear, and quite fresh. Temperatures, certainly in rural areas, dropping down to freezing. So a chilly start to Tuesday, but for many it'll be a fine, bright, sunny start. Lots of cloud for eastern Scotland, spreading into southern and central Scotland across northern England through the day. Some cloud developing further south and west, but again for Wales, much of southern England, dry and bright with decent spells of sunshine. Feeling chilly with that thicker cloud in the east. Again, one or two showers over eastern England, but again in the sunny spells across the southwest, temperatures in the mid-teens with light winds. Doesn't feel too bad. Again, through Tuesday evening, we'll keep largely dry conditions, and as skies clear, it will turn quite cold. A fresh start to Wednesday. The high pressure sitting to the north starts to drift back further south and actually sits right across the UK for the second half of the week, bringing further dry and mainly fine conditions with chilly nights.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least